You cannot manifest whatever you want in life without first embodying and becoming the version of you who already has those things. What do they look like? How do they talk? How do they show up for themselves? What's their energy like when they walk into a room? How do they talk about themselves to other people? How do they talk about themselves when they're alone? Becoming your higher self is all about identity work, and this is an identity shift. It's not about manifesting a specific thing. It's about embodying and becoming and stepping into the identity of the version of you that already has all of those things. Your higher self is your most highest, most abundant, most powerful, most successful expression of your identity. It's the version of you whose internal identity, which is your self-concept, and external expression, which is your aura, are perfectly aligned. Your higher self is the conscious creator of their reality and effortlessly attracts everything they desire into their reality with aligned action and absolute self-belief. I like to think of the higher self as a spirit guide that is asking you to embody it. So by the end of this video, you will go from not feeling like the person you were always meant to be, which is your old or current self, to knowing exactly who your higher self is, knowing how to embody them, and knowing that they already exist within you. Hey angels, I'm Christian and welcome back to my YouTube channel where we talk all things mindset, manifestation, spiritual healing, and beauty. Now, when it comes to the higher self, why should you trust me? Growing up, I was such an expressive and imaginative and intuitive child. I knew exactly who I was. I really believe that your child self is actually the closest version of you to your higher self. Your child self forever lives in a state of imagination and optimism and creativity and is always in a hyper present state. And we're going to get to the idea of living in presence later. Growing up queer, I always knew I was different. I always knew that I had to shapeshift and repress my identity and monitor my gestures and censor my desires. Growing up queer, I always felt like there were certain identities or certain experiences or certain ways of living that I would never get to have. That was my first limitation. I then grew up around narcissistic abuse and had so many limiting beliefs that were constantly projected onto me about my potential or about my success. And eventually those limiting beliefs became my own. And when you hear something enough times, it becomes your identity. So if you constantly hear negative projections or limiting beliefs, or you repeat them yourself, that's who you'll become. And same goes for the opposite. If you constantly repeat and affirm and replay positive, expansive, uplifting, and optimistic truths about yourself, that's who you'll become. So growing up queer gave me an experiential limitation. I knew I wouldn't experience life the same way as other people. Growing up with narcissistic abuse gave me an identity limitation because I was told that I was someone who I was not. And then my younger brother passed away from cancer, and that was and still is so devastating for me. That gave me such an overarching, overwhelming, limiting belief about life itself and how life is unfair and how could something so cruel and so unfortunate and tragic happen to, my beautiful brother and to my family. And so my transformation was never about becoming someone new. My journey to finding my higher self was about returning to the version of me that existed before the fear, before the limitation, before the repression, before the grief, and embodying that version of me and then evolving beyond that person. And I know you've experienced this too, because this kind of pain and suffering and trauma and projection creates limitation and creates resistance and inevitably makes it harder for us to embody our higher self. And even though it may seem hard, it really is not meant to be. And I'm here to help you overcome all of that and really embody the version of you you were always destined to be. So let's get into it. Now we're going to talk about why you aren't your higher self yet and exactly how you can become them. Get a pen and paper, get your journal, get up your notes app, and let's start. Firstly, I'm talking purely from my own experience and how I went from being extremely miserable, extremely repressed, suffering with mental health, very much identifying with that story and unknowingly loving it, to becoming the empowered, expressive, boisterous, inspired, optimistic, abundant, creative person I am talking to you right now. Journaling, affirming, visualizing are all key and crucial components to manifestation, but when it comes to becoming your higher self, those things only work once you've changed your internal identity first. You are not your higher self yet because you are a bad person, because you're a failure, because you're unsuccessful. You are not your higher self yet because you are still operating from a scarcity, a limiting, a fearful, and a victim mindset. Your higher self operates entirely from a winner's mindset. They move with confidence, they move with conviction, audacity, self belief, and a deep knowing that their dream life is inevitable. So let's talk about the nervous system. So if you grew up around instability and rejection and suffering, you have a wounded nervous system and therefore a dysregulated nervous system. In order to embody your higher self, you need to have a regulated nervous system. Your nervous system is your body's emotional control center. It knows if you feel safe or threatened or confident or insecure long before your brain does. Nervous system regulation is literally the emotional foundation of self-concept work, identity work, and embodying your higher self. Your higher self doesn't just live in your thoughts, it lives in your body. So if your nervous system feels unsafe, your identity defaults to survival mode, no matter how many affirmations you repeat, no matter how much you journal, no matter how much you visualize. Regulating your nervous system is what allows your beliefs to stabilize, and stability is what allows you to shift your identity. So I want you to ask yourself, does my body feel safe right now? When I think of my higher self, where in my body do I feel tension? What beliefs resurface when I feel that tension? Does the idea of my higher self flow to me effortlessly, or is there resistance? And what story have I held on to in that area of my life? Pause this video, answer those questions in your own time. Becoming your higher self is about shedding your old self like a snake sheds its skin. And with the higher self comes the shadow self. And so regulating your nervous system is all about understanding the pain that is stored in your body that your old self and shadow self still hold on to. Some of my favorite ways to regulate my nervous system are with breath work. So deep inhales, deep exhales, box breathing, counting for 4, or meditation. Another favorite technique is EFT tapping while repeating uplifting and expansive affirmations that not only disrupts your body's threat response, but also releases old emotional patterns. Once you do breath work and EFT tapping, you can then affirm and repeat affirmations in a regulated state. So now that you understand how the wounded nervous system is the core emotional foundation that allows you to embody and comfortably become your higher self, let's move on. Let's talk about fear versus certainty. Your old self operates from a place of fear. Your higher self operates from a place of certainty. What if it doesn't work out? It always works out for me. Maybe I'm too sensitive. My sensitivity heals the world. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm better than I realize. These are the contrasts between your old self and your higher self. Your external reality is a reflection of your internal emotional state. Your old identity operates with a dysregulated nervous system, and a dysregulated nervous system operates from a place of fear. In order to release all fear, you need to first learn to regulate your nervous system by affirming ideas and feelings of certainty. Your higher self isn't fearless, okay? It's normal for us to all have fears and limiting beliefs and fearful beliefs that crop up. But they know that as soon as a fearful belief comes up, it must immediately be addressed and extinguished with the power of certainty. What if it doesn't work out? Of course it's going to work out for me. Of course it's going to work out for me. Everything always works out for me. I'm feeling afraid right now, but I'm also courageous enough to take the leap and to know that it'll all work out, and to know that my courage and my faith and my optimism alone is what will carry me forward. That's how your higher self thinks. Now that you know the difference between the fear of your old self and the certainty of your higher self, we need to talk about releasing the old self. In order to become your higher self, you need to release the old identity. Your current identity is built through repeated thoughts, repeated emotions, and repeated behaviors, which all create a repeated reality. Your higher self is very mindful of the thoughts that it repeats, very conscious of the emotions that it replays, and very intentional about the behaviors that it partakes in. In cultivating this consciousness, you'll gradually shed the old habits, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of the old identity and transform into your highest, most powerful, and abundant self. The old self breaks promises to themselves. The higher self keeps the promises they make to themselves. The old self lies to avoid pain. The old self is honest despite pain. The old self replays toxic and unhealthy emotions. The higher self focuses on healing and letting go. The old self makes excuses for poor choices. The higher self takes accountability and changes. So we've released the old identity, and now it's time to release the limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs are emotional habits. We cling on to them, we love them, we stick to them because they feel familiar. But familiarity is not fact. 99% of us grew up with limiting beliefs that were projected onto us from family, from friends, from society. And although the conditioning that we got was not our fault, it is our responsibility to consciously counter-argue every limiting belief that resurfaces and replays in our mind. Your old self thinks in limiting beliefs. Your higher self thinks in expansive truths. So whether related to identity or success or finances or love, your higher self will never limit itself or its potential with fearful or scarcity beliefs. I can't afford that. I can afford anything I desire. I could never do that. I can achieve anything I set my mind to. It will never work out. I believe it will work out. Your old self thinks in limitation. Your higher self thinks in expansion. Now, lastly, I want to talk about releasing the victim mindset. Most people are reluctant to give up their suffering because they secretly love it. Your pain and trauma and heartbreak inevitably shapes your emotional landscape, but it should never shape your emotional identity. You know, we've all suffered at the hands of someone or a circumstance or even society. Having suffered doesn't invalidate your experience, and having suffered doesn't mean that you're not a victim. You can be a victim of something, but not identify or integrate that victimhood into your identity. You know, suffering doesn't mean that pain needs to become your personality, because healing is never about forgetting what happened to you. It's about never letting it define who you are. A victim thinks that life is so unfair and that nothing ever goes their way and that they're unlucky in love and that, oh, this circumstance is just my luck. That's so typical. But your higher self thinks that life is rigged in their favor, that everything always goes their way, that they always attract the right kind of love, that they're the luckiest person on earth. A negative circumstance does not affect them because they know they're lucky anyway. In order to become your higher self, you need to release the old identity, release the limiting beliefs, and release the victim mentality. As I said, your higher self is the highest, most powerful, most successful, and abundant expression of your identity. And it's when your internal identity, which is your self-concept, and external expression, which is your aura, are perfectly aligned. This video was all about how to release the old identity and start your internal shift from within, because the higher self starts within. I'm going to make another video all about how to embody your higher self through your external expression with things like beauty and health and affirmations. I love you, my angels. Thank you for all your love and support. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week for another video.